Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to take a closer look at a very significant development in the Middle East, as reports confirm that Israeli airstrikes have struck targets in Yemen's capital, Sanaa. This is not just another regional clash, but an event that ties into the much larger web of ongoing conflicts, alliances, and rivalries across the region. Understanding what happened and why it matters requires breaking down the context, the motivations, and the possible consequences of these strikes. The first thing to note is that Israeli involvement in Yemen is not something we often hear about. The conflict in Yemen has for years primarily involved the Houthis on one side and the Saudi-led coalition on the other. However, the Houthis have expanded their influence beyond Yemen by targeting Israeli interests and international shipping in the Red Sea. This has made the Houthis a concern for Israel, especially as the group strengthens ties with Iran, Israel's main regional rival. According to early reports, Israeli aircraft targeted key Houthi positions in Sanaa, focusing on facilities believed to be linked to missile and drone operations. The Houthis have repeatedly demonstrated their ability to launch long-range drones and missiles, some of which have been aimed at Israel or at vessels connected to Israeli trade routes. By striking in Sanaa, Israel is sending a very clear message that it will not allow hostile forces with Iranian backing to develop advanced capabilities that could threaten its security. The timing of these strikes is also important. They come at a moment when tensions between Israel and Iran are already extremely high, with Iranian proxies across the region stepping up attacks. In Lebanon, Hezbollah continues to engage in clashes with Israeli forces. In Iraq and Syria, Iran-backed militias are frequently targeted by Israeli or U.S. operations. By extending its reach into Yemen, Israel is essentially widening the battlefield, showing that geography will not protect Iran's allies. It is also crucial to understand why Yemen matters strategically. The country sits near the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, one of the most critical maritime choke points in the world. Every year, enormous amounts of global trade, including oil shipments, pass through this narrow waterway. The Houthis have already attacked commercial vessels in the region, and some of these attacks have been linked directly to Israel. Any attempt to disrupt this route not only harms Israel, but also destabilizes the global economy. That is why Israel sees the Houthis as a legitimate and immediate threat. For Yemenis living in Sanaa, however, these strikes add yet another layer of suffering. The city has already endured years of war, destruction, and humanitarian crises. Airstrikes, whether from the Saudi-led coalition or now from Israel, inevitably risk civilian casualties and deepen the sense of instability. While Israel insists its targets are strictly military, the reality is that Yemen's urban areas are densely populated, and precision is never perfect in warfare. The human cost is something that cannot be ignored. This action also raises questions about how far Israel is willing to go in directly confronting Iran's network of proxies. For years, Israel has focused heavily on strikes inside Syria, targeting weapons transfers and Iranian infrastructure. But striking in Yemen suggests a shift, an indication that Israel sees the need to preempt threats even before they reach its doorstep. It is both a warning to the Houthis and a challenge to Iran itself. Iran, for its part, will not take these strikes lightly. Tehran has built up the Houthis as part of its axis of resistance, a network of groups meant to counter Israel and U.S. allies across the Middle East. The Houthis provide Iran with a strategic advantage because they control territory near vital shipping lanes. If Israel disrupts this, Iran loses leverage. We can therefore expect that Iran may encourage the Houthis to retaliate with even more intensity, perhaps with strikes on Israeli territory or shipping interests. At the same time, the broader international community is watching carefully. The United States, already involved in countering Houthi attacks on shipping, will likely see Israel's actions as complementary. Washington and Tel Aviv share concerns about Iran's growing influence, and cooperation in this area may deepen. On the other hand, Countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, who have struggled to defeat the Houthis for nearly a decade, may see Israel's involvement as both a help and a complication. They welcome any weakening of the Houthis, but fear that Israel's strikes could escalate the conflict into something even harder to control. Another layer to consider is how this plays into Israel's domestic and regional politics. Inside Israel, the government faces pressure to appear strong in the face of threats. By striking Yemen, the leadership can demonstrate that it is proactive and uncompromising when it comes to national defense. Regionally, it also reinforces Israel's alignment with Gulf Arab states that oppose the Houthis and Iran. Even if these states do not openly coordinate with Israel, they benefit indirectly from Israeli actions against a common enemy. Yet the risks are obvious. Expanding military operations into Yemen stretches Israel's resources and opens it up to more fronts of conflict. Already Israel faces threats from Hezbollah, Hamas, and Iran directly. Adding Yemen into the mix could mean a longer and more unpredictable struggle. The Houthis have proven resilient, surviving years of bombardment by some of the world's most advanced militaries. If Israel believes it can simply bomb them into submission, it may be underestimating the endurance and guerrilla tactics of this group. Looking ahead, one of the most important questions is whether this marks the beginning of a sustained Israeli campaign in Yemen, or whether it was a limited strike meant only as a warning. If it is the start of a broader campaign, we could see repeated strikes and possibly coordination with other regional powers. If it was simply a one-time message, then the Houthis' response will determine what happens next. For the people of Yemen, however, these geopolitical calculations provide little comfort. The country has already been described as the world's worst humanitarian crisis, with famine, disease, and economic collapse devastating millions. More airstrikes, no matter who carries them out, only worsen this crisis. This is the tragic reality of a conflict that has drawn in so many outside powers, while the Yemeni people continue to suffer the most. In summary, the Israeli airstrikes on Sanaa represent a bold and dangerous escalation in the Middle East conflict. They show that Israel is willing to take direct action far from its borders to neutralize threats. They highlight the growing role of the Houthis in the Iran-Israel rivalry. They put pressure on Iran while risking retaliation and further destabilization of the region. And most importantly, they once again underline how ordinary civilians end up paying the highest price in wars driven by regional power struggles. The world will now be watching to see how the Houthis and Iran respond, and whether this sets off a new cycle of violence that extends the already devastating wars in the Middle East. For Israel, the strikes are a show of strength. For the Houthis, they are a call to resist even harder. And for the region, they are another reminder that peace remains distant while rivalries continue to fuel destruction.